1 through 8. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices, so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll the stone away for us at the entrance of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Please pray with me. Dear God, please be with me this morning and help me to preach. Come among us and help these words become more than just my words. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts, may that be acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Once upon a time, an alcoholic became a believer. And he gave up his excessive drinking and he turned to a life of following Jesus. Now, his old drinking buddies, they made fun of him, like a lot. And they asked him, how can you seriously believe all that nonsense that's in the Bible? I mean, come on. What about miracles? You're a smart guy. You got to know better than that, right? And the man chuckled and he laughed along with them, a little bit, but they pushed on him. And he said, really, though, you don't believe that Jesus actually turned water into wine, do you? The man paused for a second. He said, I do. I really do. I know that Jesus can turn water into wine because in my house he turned whiskey into furniture. I want to begin this morning by asking a very simple question. Do you believe in miracles? Now, I don't mean like the general, of course, yeah, a long time ago those happened. I mean, do you believe that they actually happened? It really happened. And when I lean on some people, I kind of push on them. A lot of times people say, well, all right, probably not. Maybe, but it seems unlikely with all the advancements in medicine and technology in our culture. It seems a little silly to believe in something so ridiculous as the supernatural or the divine. We're too smart to believe in miracles, right? The modern man understands the world. I know too much to believe in miracles, to believe that there could be something more. And yet, when I look back over history, I realize that every great breakthrough that humanity has ever had came from someone who defied the accepted notions of medical or technological understanding. Every great invention came from someone who was surrounded by a bunch of people telling them, can't be done. It's impossible. The world is flat. If you sail across that ocean, you will fall off the end and die. That's what science tells us. A man cannot fly into the air as if like a bird. If your machine is heavier than the air, science tells us that it cannot be in the air. Scientists tell me that. If I had a time machine, I would just love to take my smartphone back to like the 1800s. Just... And so what I wonder, the more I think about it, the more I realize that scientific discovery should actually increase our belief in the supernatural, in the unknown, not decrease it. At every stage of history, we have learned more about our world, and yet at every stage, including this one, we believe that we know everything. We've convinced ourselves, well, back then they didn't know as much, but they thought they did. They thought they knew everything about the world. Perhaps science should be a tool for discovery and not a system to impose limitations on our reality. You don't have to throw away science in order to believe in the divine. Quite the opposite. As we grow in our understanding of the natural world through scientific process, we can be forced to no other conclusion than this existence of an incredible, benevolent Creator. And so I ask, do you believe in miracles? Today is the first sermon in a brand new sermon series called breaking barriers, the miracles of Jesus. For the next couple of weeks, for the month of April, we're going to take an in-depth look at the miracles of Jesus and what they teach us about the God who is actually out there. And what we're going to discover is that God has a habit of breaking barriers. You see, we humans, we love to create rules, to set up systems to understand our world. It makes us feel better, helps us feel in control of our lives, of our own destiny. But to help us grow, every now and then God has to come in and break some of those rules, break down the barriers in our life. So today, I want to talk about the freedom that comes when God tears down the walls in your life. So we get started in Mark chapter 4, verse 35, where it says, "On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and the other boats were with him." And so Jesus has been teaching all day to a whole big crowd of people. And so what he does is at the end of the day, they hop in the boat and they head out onto the water. And then it says in verse 37, "And there was a great windstorm that arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him, and they said, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke, and he rebuked the wind and the sea. 'Peace, be still.' Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?'" I like to imagine Jesus waking up from his nap a little grumpy. You know, maybe he's got a little bed head, little hair disheveled, kind of disheveled. And he waves his arms, and he rebukes the wind, kind of like a teenager going after the alarm clock. He's like, "Peace, knock it off, be still," Which, let's just pause for a second. That would be like the rantings of a crazy person, right? Jesus is yelling at the wind, except that it works. And the wind calms down. He turns to the disciples and he says, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" Which shows us that this is not the first time the disciples have seen Jesus do something amazing. This is not the first time. And he's sort of like, "How are you not getting this?" And in verse 41, it says, I'm struggling. There it is. "And they were filled with a great fear. And they said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" Who is this guy that even the wind and the waves obey him? But I guess that's the question, isn't it? Who is this guy? And so we fast forward a couple of chapters to chapter 16 of Mark, which is the Easter story, and it begins in verse 2. "And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, 'Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?' Now these women, they had spices. This is on Sunday morning, Easter Sunday. Those women, they brought spices to put on a dead body, right? And that's what they were going to do. And their only concern was, hey, how are we going to get in there? Who's going to, move the big rock for us? The Bible is very clear. Nobody thought that the resurrection was going to be real. Nobody believed that this was actually going to happen. But then it continues in verse 4. "And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back, and it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe. And they were alarmed. And he said to them, 'Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee. Then they will see you. Then there you will see him, just as he told you.'" Just as he told you. And we're reminded that again, Jesus told them exactly what was going to happen. He told his disciples, "I'm going to die. I will be crucified. 3 days later, I will rise from the dead." It's just as you told you. And yet they still cannot figure it out. Have you still no faith? Verse 8. It says, "And they went out, and they fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." They run away from the tomb, trembling. I guess it kind of shakes the world a little bit to witness something that expands what you believe is possible. Everyone, think about this. Everyone assumed that that was the end of the story. Think about the things that people told Jesus back when he was in custody. Well, yeah, when he was in custody before the council and they were questioning him, people told him, save yourself, Jesus. Just confess, save yourself. And then when they were whipping him, preparing him for the crucifixion, save yourself, man. Just get out of this, save yourself. And then when he was up on the cross, come on, man. If you are the Son of God, save yourself. Get down off the cross before it is too late. Before it's too late. They viewed death as an immovable wall. An absolute limitation. There was nothing you could do. You have to save yourself before it's too late, before you die. They assumed that Jesus could only save himself before he died. Death is always the end of the story. It will be too late if he goes all the way to being dead. But by waiting 3 days and then coming back, Jesus shows us his real power. See, his focus in all of this was not to save himself. His goal was not to convince people. His goal was to overcome death. Not save himself from it, but to overcome it. To show us that death is not the end of the story anymore. God overcame death that day by showing humanity that his authority is complete over all of the earth. Now, verse 8 says that they didn't tell anybody, but eventually word does spread. And Jesus starts appearing to people like Mary Magdalene, and the story starts to get told. And in verse 11 it says, she went and she told those who had been with him, and they mourned and wept. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. Verse 13, different crowd of people. And they went back and they told the rest, but they did not believe them. No one believed that this thing actually happened, that this resurrection actually occurred. A lot of times when I'm talking to non-Christians about the resurrection, about Jesus, about miracles, or even just God or divine things, if I'm talking about that with like an atheist or an agnostic person, they always say the same thing. If you could just give me a little evidence. Just give me some proof that God is real. And yet I'm reading this story. These guys had the proof. They had the evidence right in front of them, and still they cannot wrap their minds around who and what Jesus is. In verse 14, Jesus has to actually show up, and then he scolds them. Verse 14, it says, afterward he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and their hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. He rebukes them. You can hear his frustration, right? What do I have to do to show you who I am? I calmed the storm. I walked on water. I multiplied loaves. I rose from the dead. What do I have to do? Have you still no faith? See, what we see in our scripture this morning is that God turns our walls into a way. God takes our assumption, our obstacles, our immovable restraints, the things that you can't do anything about, and he turns them into a path for freedom, a way of salvation. God used Jesus' death as a way to give us life. Obstacles. Think about this. We all have walls in our lives, obstacles in our world that we have built up in front of, limitations on what we believe is possible. There are things that hold us back in life. But here's the thing I want you to realize this morning. We built those walls. We put those limitations in place, right? So let me ask you, what are the bricks in your wall? What keeps you from getting things done in the world? What keeps you from living God's way? Oh, I can't do it. I've got too many health concerns. I can't do it. I don't have enough money. I can't do it. I'm not smart enough to obey God, to live God's way. I can't do it. I'm just a kid. I'm just a woman. I'm just one person. We tell ourselves over and over the miracles are not possible. And we take these bricks and we place them in front of ourselves, walling ourselves in, telling ourselves, I can't do it. I can't. It is impossible. We wall ourselves in. We put the leash around our own neck when we say that miracles are not possible. And yet, I remember a time when they said, you can't have a female superhero. You can't have a female lead in a superhero movie. It just doesn't work. You can't do that because, it's not going to be as successful, and you certainly can't have a woman director. That just doesn't work. Can we go to the next slide? Oops. Highest grossing superhero origin story of all time. Highest grossing superhero movie in the DC Extended Universe, and highest grossing movie of 2017. I think that's when it came out, 2017. Cannot be done. Oh, actually, can we move to the next slide? All those records got broken by this one like 3 weeks ago. So cannot be done, except we just did it twice. Well, all right, but they're white. Right? You cannot, I remember when they said, well, you definitely can't have a black superhero film. They tried it a couple of times and they just didn't work. It was, it's not going to be as much money. Inequality is built into our structure, especially if they have a black director. It cannot be done. Highest rated superhero movie of all time. And at over $1 billion, it brought in more than any other solo superhero ever. Have you still no faith? Now, I know what you might be thinking, well, all right, those are superhero movies, right? That's not reality. That's not real. That doesn't express the real world. Okay, so what about the real world? I remember a time when we would look at wealthy executives and politicians and we would watch them abuse their power and hurt the women in their lives, use their power to oppress people in their life, and they would get away with it over and over. I'm 30 years old. I'm not that old, but I remember a time when I was told that's just how it is. That's just how the world works. There's always going to be a few bad eggs. There's nothing you can really do to stop them. Men treating women poorly, that's just a part of our culture. Inequality is the expectation. We don't talk about it. We just brush it under the rug a little bit, and we'll try not to, and actually we'll see if we can find a way to blame the victim. Then about a year and a half ago, the Me Too movement started, which brought down people we thought were invincible. Politicians, Hollywood executives, lawyers, doctors. I mean, it cannot be done, and yet we did it. There's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way the world is, and yet here we are, reshaping the world to be a safer place for women. Have you still no faith? Now, I just grabbed a couple examples from the last few years. Right? What I'm trying to show you is that what we are told over and over that it cannot be done, that it is impossible to accomplish, and when we believe them, we put one more brick in front of us, into the wall that is in front of us. Do you see what I'm trying to show you? We are living in the age of miracles right now. Have you still no faith? God turns our walls into a way. Take a second and just think for this morning, what would it mean for your life if the resurrection of Jesus Christ was a real thing? If we took it seriously, that there was a man who rose from the dead, what would that mean in your life? What are the walls that are holding you back? The obstacles that you feel like you cannot overcome? There's an old saying, whether you believe you can overcome or not, you will always be right. If you do not believe you can overcome, if you think there's no way, you're right. But if you believe it can be done, if you believe that you can overcome, you are right. What I'm trying to point out is that there is a psychological benefit to believing in miracles. They have done study after study to show that people of faith have accomplished the impossible far more often. Faith has an incredible benefit for those who try. If you believe, you can overcome. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying you're going to get it done on the first try, but I'm saying that there is a God out there who has a habit of turning our walls into a way. There is a God who has a habit of breaking down barriers. So here's what we do with that. I want you to let the resurrection of Jesus Christ rip a hole in the walls of your life. Whatever is holding you back, whatever obstacle you have, you cannot climb over, I want you to roll away the stone. Think about the bricks that are in your wall. What's going on in your life? What are you struggling with? Drugs, broken relationships, troublesome kids, troublesome parents, trouble at school, bullying, financial struggles, addictions, national, local controversies, family drama. Let me say that one again. Family drama. And maybe just a little bit more family drama. Think about the moments in your life when you are tempted to live away from God, to live in a way that God would not be proud of. You have built yourself a wall, and it is impossible to overcome. And yet we are here this morning to celebrate a God who rolls away that stone. In just a couple of weeks, he is going to smash a hole in the wall and overcome when it is supposed to be impossible. So this morning, I want you to take a second and let the resurrection of Jesus Christ rip a hole in the walls of your life. And then, once you believe that there is a God who makes a way and he's behind you and he's loving you and he's giving you a second chance, then it is time. It's time to start tearing down that wall, brick by brick. I want you to give those obstacles to God. I'm struggling with this thing, God, but I'm going to give it to you. I don't know how I'm going to overcome this, but I'm going to give it to you. Brick by brick, we give our life to God and we watch the walls come crumbling down. Do you believe in miracles? Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came to earth all those years ago to break down barriers, to show us that the limitations of this world are just that, limitations of this world. There are no limits on God. And so I'll leave you with this. May you let the resurrection of Jesus Christ rip a hole in the walls of your life. Let it give you hope that there is another way that is possible. May you climb through the wall, climb out of the box and into the light of God's glory. Go do something impossible today. Amen. All right, so now we're going to prepare our hearts for communion. And it's a story that I always like to tell. We tell the same story every month, but I love telling it. 3,000 years ago, the people of God were in slavery in Egypt, and they were oppressed